When I first fell in love with animal sculpture, I found it challenging to prevent the clay from sagging or to create perfect detail, especially for realism, until I learned how to make wire armatures. That really changed everything. I'd love to share with you what I learned for low-cost armature tools, budget-friendly supplies, and tips I wish I would have known when I started to sculpt realistic and dynamic animals. I'll demonstrate a beginner-friendly style of sculpture armature perfect for many art styles, even ultra-realism, and I'll talk about alternatives too. I'll also share some tips for accurately working in miniature scales, checking proportions, and some secrets to success, all of which I hope will bring joy to your own sculpting adventures. Armatures are an important step in how to make a clay sculpture as they give strength and rigidity to the clay, which also makes it easier to sculpt details. They're now an essential sculpture technique for me, especially for realistic clay sculptures. They act like a wire frame or a wire skeleton to support your clay and give strength and rigidity to your creations. They help prevent issues like clay sagging too. This is a freestanding wire armature, which works well if you're sculpting with air-dry clay, polymer clay, or epoxy putty like Milliput, and it's an easy armature for beginners. The second option is a twist on the first, where filler material like thin metal sheets is used to cost-effectively add bulk and even reduce the weight of the final sculpture. This is my personal favorite as it's a budget-friendly way to reduce your clay costs. Just be cautious with your choice of fillers, as not all can go in a kiln or oven. As always, do your research, folks. Next is mounting a wire armature to wood, which is great for sculptures that need additional support so they don't fall over. There's also the more classical, fine art approach of threading the wire through pipes, which is then often mounted to a wooden base called a plinth. I'm showing the freestanding option the most throughout this video as I feel it's both the most beginner-friendly, easier to source materials, and is versatile across sizes, clays, and styles. By the way, if you give them all a try, I would love to hear which one becomes your favorite in the comments. To get started building an armature for sculptures, you'll also want some reference materials, such as anatomical diagrams or your own drawings from the side of the animal. A really good profile view is important, as you'll see why in a moment. Also, stay towards the end of the video for a few of my favorite reference sources for getting started as a beginner. To make life easier, I like to scale my reference materials to the actual size I want to sculpt at, either by digitally scaling and printing it or drawing it at scale. I do this by first figuring out how big the animal is in real life, then choosing what scale I want it to be in, and then working out the math. If you don't want to do the math, there are scale conversion charts that will crunch the numbers for you. I'll link one below. Also, I found the easiest measurement for animal size is the height from the ground to their wither or shoulder. From the ground to the hips can work too. Then I make a box in a drawing program. You can use any drawing program you want that is sized to the wither or hip height the scale math told me to use. Honestly, drawing out scaled boxes and printing charts to scale was such a game changer when I started scale sculpture. With this reference, you'll use wire to plot out the basic skeletal structure such as legs, head, spine, and tail. Speaking of wire, there are a few things to keep in mind when choosing wire. Is it firm or soft? And is it thick or thin? How soft and bendable it is, or how firm and strong, depends on its material. There are a lot out there, and to keep it simple, your softer wires are usually made from copper or aluminum. This is often what you find in art stores as they are easy to bend and shape. However, because they are soft, they can warp under the weight of heavy clays. So if using heavy clays, think about using stronger wires made from something like steel. Steel wires are firm, which may mean you'll want to use some pliers to help bend them into shape. But the trade-off is you'll get a really sturdy armature for holding heavy clays like epoxy putty or lots of dense plastilina clay. My favorite is galvanized wire as it holds a lot of weight and I find it's not too hard to bend. It's also the cheapest option for me as I can get it at hardware stores where it's often priced less than art store sculpture wire. The final thing to remember about wire is its thickness, which is measured in millimeters, or in the USA, it's measured in gauges. These gauges are assigned different numbers, and the higher the number, the thinner the wire. So a 5 gauge wire is going to be very thick compared to a skinny 26 gauge wire. Which gauges you need is really personal preference and depends on the size and weight of your sculptures, so I would recommend experimenting to find your favorites. For reference, my personal favorites are something like a 14 gauge, a 16 gauge, and a skinny 19 gauge. These three often work well for most of my projects. Next, you'll need cutters for cutting the wire, as well as pliers for bending wire, or you can get a plier that has a cutter on it and save a little. This next one is optional but highly recommended, and that's a filler material for bulking up your sculptures and reducing clay costs. Common fillers are foil, foam, paper, or wood, though you'll want to research which is safe to use with your clay and any curing instructions, especially if your clay cures in a kiln or oven. I personally like aluminum foil as it's easy for me to find cheaply and easy for me to crumple into the shape I want. There's also something kind of satisfying about crunching all that foil into a shape that starts to look a little like an animal. Other optional but handy tools and supplies are pipes and wood for building more traditional armature options. This can add a little expense, but you can often find them anywhere building and plumbing supplies are sold, often for a lower price than art stores. Screws and a manual or powered screwdriver can give you more options to mount wire to a wooden base. Calipers or rulers are really handy for checking proportions and anatomical realism. Alright, I think I've teased the process enough. Let's actually get started. All armatures are easiest if starting with the profile of the animal first and the width second. This begins with the wire, and I often start with one wire that runs through the head, the neck, the spine, and the tail if applicable. Next, you'll need 2 more sets of wires for the legs, and there are a couple of ways you can do that. I like to use one wire for the front legs and another for the back legs. I use enough length of wire to run the length of the legs, the shoulder bones, or hip bones folded over so I can create both legs at once. This helps make sure that they are the same length and equal proportions too. This method made my sculpting life so much easier. I also like to mark joint areas in marker to help with proportions, especially when I'm posing the armature later. Future me always thanks past me for that little extra effort. The other more traditional option is to use longer wire that runs the length of the front leg, down the center of the animal, and back down the hind leg. You can use thinner wire to join these 3 together in the middle. While I can bend the wire I'm using with just my fingers, I do get more precise bends for the joint area using needle nose pliers. These ones also have cutters on them for easy cutting. Whichever method you choose, don't forget to bend the leg wires to mimic the curve of the bones and to start creating the width of the animal. I often like to start adding a little bulk by using foil to fill in the ribcage area. Make a note of where the ribcage is widest and where it is most narrow on your animal of choice. And now your armatures are ready to pose. Those needle nose pliers can come in handy here. And here's where those marked for those joints are useful, as those are the areas you want to bend the wire. By the way, if you're finding this helpful, let me know in the comments, or you can pretend the like button is a cute little animal snoot to boop. Boop. Posing is one of my favorite steps, as it's where the joy of sculpting begins to shine, and there's just so much creativity we can have here. It's where I have fun creating a personality for my animal based on its movement, and even start to tell a story. I like to ask myself about who the animal is, where it's going, if it's reacting to something, and I answer those with the pose. Boom, instant story. This is such a fun part of the sculpture process if you let yourself play. As I'm posing my armature, I'm also regularly setting it down and looking at it from all angles to see how well balanced it is and making corrections as needed. This can be a little tricky, so I always take my time to get something I'm really happy with, as trying to fix balance issues later when the clay is on is much harder than fixing it now, especially with epoxy putty clays that cure very firm. Also, this is where I try to think about the sculpture's final weight with clay, and I think how heavy each section might be, so I can add reinforcement or counterbalances now. Pegs under legs or bellies are an option, as well as adding a little rock or ball bearing as a counterbalance. Once I'm happy with the pose, I finish adding bulk with foil if I haven't already. Also, I imagine you clicked on this because you have an animal you're wanting to sculpt, and I would love to hear in the comments what it is. I'm curious to see what animals everyone is sculpting. By the way, these armatures of mine are for horses, a Malaysian tapir, a North American bison, and a North American elk. I'm so excited for them and looking forward to sharing more of them in the future. Learning to create accurate proportions in sculpture, especially in a realistic style, is a common challenge, and I learned an easy way of measuring proportions by using the head of the animal as a standard of measurement. A couple books explain it in illustrated depth, like the Atlas of Animal Anatomy by Ellenberger, or Modeling and Sculpting Animals by Edward Lentry. In horses, for example, the head is a common proportion equal to the length of the shoulders, the legs, the rib cage, and more. This is where calipers come in handy to help you learn these proportions and will help train your eye to see them on your own. You can also take measurements of any body part of the animal and see how it compares to other sections in the body of your references and check that against your sculpture, essentially coming up with your own method for proportions. With time, you can photograph your own references and sketch out your own proportion charts for all sorts of animals. Using eye widths and the distance between ears and eyes are two other units of measure I find helpful in my own projects, especially for head proportions. Also, remember these methods don't always work for extreme action poses, and some animals are especially tricky. For example, when a horse's neck is up, it's about the same length as its head. But when the vertebrae uncurl as the head is lowered, the neck becomes a little longer. So keep things like that in mind. I also find it helpful to check that the distance between joints is correct. For example, I'll measure the distance between the knee and fetlock to make sure both cannon bones are the same length on my horses and other four-legged animals. I find it especially helpful to check again after posing to make sure proportions didn't change as I bent the wire, as they quite often can. Learning proportions can sometimes be frustrating as a beginner, so if you feel this, just know this is a normal feeling and it does get easier to learn with a little time. If you want to speed up the process, look at as many references as you can, watch videos of animals in movement, and if you can, view them in person and take lots of your own reference photos or even sketches. I find taking my own reference photos and sketches has been hugely helpful. Speaking of things that are helpful, here are some of my favorite tips for success. First, wrapping really thin wire, like a 24 gauge jewelry wire, around thin areas like legs help make it easier to stick clay to the armature. I found this tip really helpful when I was learning how to put clay on an armature without it just sliding off. I also find it relaxing to twirl the wire. Rotate your armature when posing to see if you find it interesting from all sides. Also, if you're working in a realism style, this helps you see if the width is looking as expected. Speaking of realism, check proportions often, especially after major changes like bending a leg, adding a lot of filler, or adding clay. You'd be surprised how much they can change, so it's always good to check often. Using a tool like calipers or a ruler can really help. Also, if you're creating polymer clay sculpture armatures, make sure to squish out air pockets from filler material like foil, because trapped pockets of air can expand in the oven, causing the polymer clay to warp or bubble as the air expands. For similar reasons, if you're working with clay that goes in a kiln, you might need to cut open the sculpture and remove the filler, a process called hollowing out. Research is your friend here. And finally, consider additional sculpture armature supplies, such as wire mesh or scraps of recycled tin for different shapes and possibilities. These materials can add great support for wings or flowing hair that would otherwise be delicate if it was just thin clay. Being creative like this is one of my favorite parts of building armatures for sculpting, and I love how resourceful materials can make expressive animal sculptures. As promised earlier, here are a few resources I wish I would have found much earlier in my art journey, as they were so helpful to me as a beginner. First are the old veterinary diagrams by Herman Dittrich, and the horse diagrams are especially helpful even to this day. You can find these at the University of Wisconsin-Madison website, which I'll link below. If you'd like printed copies of these, they also come in this book, An Animal Atlas for Artists by Ellenberger. I've had this copy since I was a kid, and it has seen many, many years of love and use, as you can see from the wear. For a deeper dive into animal anatomy and how to work with forms in art, check out Animal Anatomy for Artists, The Elements of Form by Elliot Goldfinger. This is quickly becoming a favorite of mine as I try to level up my animal anatomy skills and improve the realism of my sculptures. I also highly recommend Pop Sculpture by Tim Bruckner, as it covers a lot of techniques like building armatures, working with different clays, and even how to mold and cast sculptures in a variety of materials. I found all three of these books were extremely helpful in my own journey to teach myself animal sculpture. If you're more of an audio-visual learner, I found YouTube channels from Jillian Higgins, New Masters Academy, David Lemon, Lundgren Braun Studio, and Robert Talone really helpful. I'm really loving how these turned out, and I'm so looking forward to trying a variety of clays on them, even some new clays I've never used before. I can't wait to share those results with you as I wrap up each project and see where the sculpting adventure takes me next. Subscribe if you want to see those. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out this next one, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!